everyone, and you're very welcome here to TU Dublin's Finbiz Sustainability webinar. My name is Linda McQueenie. I'm a lecturer here in TU Dublin. And I think that video there summarises pretty much why we're here today. I'm delighted you've joined us and our four panellists for what will be a very interesting and informative session on sustainability, reporting of, and the impact of this on business, the current trends and the future trends in this area. We'd love to hear from you during the webinar. Any questions you may have to the chat. My colleague Cormac McMahon will direct your questions to the speakers at the end of the session. Just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded. I will pass you over now to my colleague Mary Jane Weberly.
Thanks, Linda. Hi, everybody. For those of you who have just joined, you're very welcome. We are delighted to have the following speakers here with us today. We have Susan Rossney. Susan is a Public Policy Officer with Chartered Accountants Ireland. Following then, Susan will hear from Áine Martin, HR Purchasing and Green Manager from Hotel Doolin, Ireland's first and only carbon neutral hotel. Then Alan McInerney from Adobe will speak to us about his career to date and what led him down the path of sustainability. And finally then we hear from Brian O'Kennedy, CEO of Clearstream Solutions, a leading independent carbon management and corporate sustainability consultancy. So now I'll hand you over to Susan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm just going to get a thumbs up from my colleagues there. I'm delighted to be given the chance to talk to you today, and thank you very much, Mary Jane and Linda, for the invitation. As Mary Jane mentioned there, I'm a Public Policy Officer with Chartered Accountants Ireland. I'm going to share some slides with you. And what I was going to talk to you today is what sustainability means for us at Chartered Accountants Ireland, which I'll refer to as the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ireland, a quick definition of what sustainability is and how we've integrated sustainability into our strategy. I hope everybody can see these slides okay. Moving on, Chartered Accountants Ireland is the largest accountancy body on the island of Ireland. We have offices in Dublin on Pearse Street and in Belfast on Linen Hall, and it's funny looking at these buildings, which I haven't seen now for nearly a year. We have over 180 staff working in across both of these organisations, and we have 29,000 members and students constantly going through our system. I wanted to show you a short video of our new strategy, Strategy 24, which talks about how we aim to be at the forefront of thought leadership and sustainability and support our members in measuring these new forms of value. This video, and I just want to make sure that this can be heard. Now, I think there's no sound coming through on that, but graphics are quite powerful anyway, and it's showing what we consider to be our role in creating these relationships for our members. Underpinning all of what tomorrow for good, which underpins our ethos. Now I'm moving on to the slide before YouTube can decide to play some more exciting videos there. How do we define sustainability in Chartered Accountants Ireland? We define it by identifying strategic priorities, and here they are: environment, social and economic, and governance wraps around all of these. So we're governed by an independent council, And under environment, we identify this as increasing capacity among our members. We write content in publications about sustainability. We hold events like CPD events, continuing professional development. A Blitz is where we have a day-long event where we cover many topics of relevance to members. And this year, for the first time, we had sustainability in business as an integral part of that. We run national events and events around our districts to increase the capacity and knowledge among members of sustainability for their own practices and in their own businesses and for those of their clients. We're a large educator of students to become chartered accountants, and sustainability has been included as a core topic in our final accounting exams. And also The Bottom Line, which is our student magazine, has information on sustainability in just the last issue, particularly what kind of roles accountants will need to meet the challenges of sustainability in the years to come. We've global networks like the Global Accounting Alliance, Accounting for Sustainability, the UN Global Compact, and Chartered Accountants Worldwide. And through these networks, we increase our own knowledge and our own reach and feed that back to our membership all the time, building on our knowledge of sustainability. We also have an Institute Environment Plan for our own organisation. I'll touch on that a little later. When it comes to social, we look at it in terms of how people can enter the profession. We've 3 entry points, which includes not just the graduate program with which people might be familiar with, but also what's called the flexible route, where people can operate in their own, in different organisations, and then do their chartered accountancy education and exams while being supported by CA support, which I mentioned underneath that. CA support supports our members and our students in many of the challenges they will face, both personal and professional. We also have a lot of staff activities around charity, and I've mentioned 2 there, Daffodil Day and Christmas in July for Down Syndrome Ireland, but there's actually a whole plethora of activities that our 180 team members are involved in, and indeed our members. Also on health, we have yoga classes, and many people are involved in the VHI mini marathon. In community, we're advocates of the Pride events, but we also work on Enactus, which is a student competition. We opened the building up for Culture Night, and we were quite active in International Women's Day. So there's a lot of us kind of being a member of the community, a business in the community, but also not forgetting our economic contribution. We commissioned Oxford Economics last year to see if they could put a monetary value on the contribution that chartered accountants make to the society across the island of Ireland. And it estimated that our contribution was 1.5 billion per annum, which is not surprising because we have so many members, 29,000 members, but also we have them at all levels of the economy, public, private and not-for-profit, from trainees all the way up to current ministers, actually, of the Minister for for Expenditure and Reform is the Chartered Accountant. So that's how we see sustainability in the Institute. How many other people, and potentially some people here at this event, may see sustainability is much more like this. So a giant alphabet soup of acronyms, of directives and standards and frameworks, which becomes so overwhelming that it's like a soup that you need help navigating. So our goal for our members and for our students is try to define sustainability as what it means for us. And for us, as I said, it means for tomorrow, for good, but that essentially means resilience, future-proofing your business. And I referred there to the Brundtland Commission's definition that it's satisfying today's needs without compromising future generations' ability to meet their needs. It's climate change. Certainly at the moment, in the next 10 years, climate change is an absolutely enormous part of it, but it also extends to social governance and economic issues as well, as I showed in the previous slide. So in this slide, I wanted to show you something that's freely available to all members of anyone really looking at our website, but members, obviously. It's the Sustainability Centre, which the Institute put live last year. It's in our Knowledge Centre on the website. And in this, you see that there's definitions of sustainability in the centre frame there of what it means, what we feel it means, references to the Sustainable Development Goals. And also there's a section on resources. And I'd urge everyone to look at this if you want to find out more about sustainability, particularly what it means for accounting. There's resources there from accounting firms. There's resources from global organisations like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We've got our articles, podcasts we've worked on, webinars we've created last year, interviews with leaders in sustainability, both members and non-members. And also there's a glossary which we put together to try to demystify some of this content, especially some of the acronyms that I showed in a previous slide. So finally, 2020-2021 is going to be a very big year for us. We have identified activities that we can do as part of our own Institute Environment Plan. It's looking at our organisation and our impact on climate, on natural resources like water, and also our waste management. So we want to show leadership in how you can create a carbon plan, how you can decarbonize your business, and how you can put metrics and targets in there to achieve, for example, carbon neutrality, which is one of our goals. This year, we're also going to be joining the UN Global Compact, which is an international organization. It's a voluntary contributions of CEOs. It's a network of CEOs who commit to having their organizations live by and operate by the principles of the UN SDGs. And this year as well, we're going to have a sustainability week for the first time in June. And as part of that, we'll be issuing publications on, for example, decarbonisation and how accountants can work with that. Also, we're having a sustainability conference on June the 16th with some very high profile speakers. So there'll be more announcements on that in the coming weeks. And finally, we'll have an international conference as part of that, where we'll bring together our Chartered Accountants network in New York, in London, and in Canada, and review sustainability through that lens and look at how members can upskill themselves and work on potentially new roles, investigate reporting, that link between finance and reporting as well. So there's a lot going on this year, and I just wanted to kind of raise those three in particular. But finally, if anybody wants to contact me, my contact details are here. I can be found obviously on LinkedIn and Twitter as well, but I would urge people to check out that Sustainability Centre and to have a look at some of the resources that are there. So I'm going to stop sharing this slide now and go back to introduce Áine, who is going to speak next. Áine is, as was mentioned, of Hotel Doolin, so I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say too. And thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Áine. I'm the HR and Purchasing Manager and Green Team Leader at Hotel Doolin, and we're Ireland's only certified carbon neutral hotel, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you today.
Áine, I think you're on mute there.
Hello everyone, so sorry about that, I was on mute. My name is Áine, I'm the HR and Purchasing Manager at Hotel Doolin. We're Ireland's only certified carbon neutral hotel in Ireland, and I am going to share my screen with you now. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, Áine, yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. So Doolin is on the west coast of Ireland. We are in County Clare, we're near the Cliffs of Moher, and we're located in the Burren and Cliffs of Moher Geopark. The Geopark is an area of unique rock formation, and that's where our whole inspiration started with our green journey 8 years ago, protecting the environment where we're located, and as well as the community as well. So the Green Team was set up 8 years ago with 3 aims. The first is to reduce the carbon footprint of the business. The second is to improve our involvement with the community. And the third was to increase our corporate social responsibility activities and to purchase locally. And at induction every month, when we have lots of new members starting, we do a whole section on our Green Team and the sustainability ethos of the hotel. So our mission statement, we have 4 cornerstones, and the first is to deliver a passion for delivering original and inventive food wherever possible, using local, organic and homemade or homegrown ingredients. 70% of our food produce is purchased from a 50-kilometre radius. We've got some wonderful suppliers, and that also means that the mileage is reduced by purchasing from local suppliers, as well as benefiting the local businesses. We deliver the very best hospitality all the time by using our key service standards. These are things that we do all the time, being a leading contributor to our community and environment, and recognising that profitability is essential to our future success as a team. So our 3 R's are to reduce, reuse, recycle, and I'll give you some examples of that. And our 3 P's are people, planet and profit. So the Green Team is subdivided into 4 sub-teams: water, energy, waste and green purchasing and corporate social responsibility. And we meet once every 2 months for about an hour. We keep it short so that it doesn't become a chore. We try to keep it as fun as possible, and we talk about goals that we will set ourselves, and then we'll come back and we'll review our achievements and set further targets. An example that I'd give you is that our kitchen is the highest energy using department in the hotel. So the executive chef is obviously the leader of the energy team. So how did we achieve carbon neutral certification? We worked with Green Hospitality, and they're the national resource for sustainable and responsible tourism in Ireland, and they're recognised by government bodies including Fáilte Ireland, Tourism Ireland, Discover Ireland and the SEAI. And certification included several visits, creating a 5-year energy efficiency plan, and finally being assessed and in our case awarded the carbon neutral green mark certification. And we're now the only premises in Ireland recognised as having achieved the certification, so we're the first and only. I believe that there's going to be 1 more hotel certified, and we actually did a show. We showed that hotel around. We like to share information about our journey so that the more businesses that are carbon neutral, the better it is for the environment. We have a 50-foot polytunnel where our chef will tell the gardener what produce he wants to have grown for the menus for the future year, and the polytunnel saves us about €6,000 per year, and again reduces the number of miles that are needed for suppliers to deliver. It also reduces waste because the ingredients can be picked fresh, so there's less food going in the bin, maybe going off, for example. And being green is not just good for the environment, but it's actually good for the profitability of the business. So for example, the more food that goes in your bin, the more you're going to have to pay for your waste collection. So it just makes sense. We also have an eco barn wedding and events venue that was built in 2018 to replace the marquee. It's an A-rated 100% soundproof building. The capacity is 300 people. We hold festivals and weddings and music events there, and it's got all LED lights. It's got an extremely energy efficient heating and ventilation system. I spoke about reusing products, so the bar counter is made from old whiskey barrels, and the lampshades at the bar are made from old fishermen's eel baskets from County Sligo. And the bottom left picture there shows you the bar counter, which is made from the old whiskey barrels, and the lampshades made from the fishermen's eel baskets. And the picture on the right is a picture of our team on the first night that we opened the barn. We hold about 130 weddings per year. So whenever, as purchasing manager, whenever something needs to be replaced, my point of view is that we don't just buy something and just replace it with what we did before. I ask the question, is there a more sustainable way of doing it? So for example, our wedding brochure there, what used to be a plastic lanyard like you'd get at a festival, and we replaced it then with the cardboard FSC. So that's just one example. We try to share the information and our story with the guests. So that's a picture of our cafe and pizzeria sign. We sell fair trade coffee. If you arrive by bicycle, you get a free tea or coffee. You get 30% off if you bring your own keep cup. And we don't sell any plastic bottles in the hotel. It's all glass and cans. If you cycle to the hotel to stay, also you get 10% off your accommodation rate. With regards to fundraising, our corporate social responsibility team raised just under 24,000 since November 2017. We climb mountains, which is good for the team building. We do monthly staff activities as well, which is good for local businesses so that we can learn about what they do, and it benefits their business as well as having a fun day out for the team. That's a picture of Gloss Restaurant, one of the menu pages, where the flags are. It shows you where the suppliers are in location to the hotel. So it's great to tell your story to the guests. For every wedding that we host, we plant 10 native trees locally. So in the last 3 years, we've planted 2,060 native trees just between Lahinch and Ennistimon, which are close by the hotel. Each tree offsets 1 ton of carbon in its lifetime, and the trees will live for an average of 70 years. And that's a picture of some of the team there. That's myself on the right, planting the trees. We asked the couples who are getting married if they want to go and plant them. So that is a key part of how we became carbon neutral. We hate plastic, so we have a refill station for refilling water bottles in the garden, and the complimentary water is reusable bottles as well. We're involved in cleaning the village and cleaning a hedgerow every year, so we do about 2 to 3 village cleanups, and we have a Smiling on the Inside wellness programme. We have a team of 90 employees, most of whom are from the local community. Most families would have somebody related to them working in the hotel. We're the largest employer in North Clare, and the Smiling on the Inside wellness programme includes staff and family membership to the local swimming pool and gym, mindfulness, weekly yoga classes, monthly staff outings, a free nutritional consultation, and a healthy staff food menu. With regards to the community, we don't just call the festivals that we host Hotel Doolin festivals. They're called Doolin Writers Weekend, Doolin Surf Fest, Doolin Folk Festival, because it's more beneficial for the community. There's a list of some of the awards that we have won. Green Award for Best Medium-Sized Organisation of the Year 2018 and 19, the Chambers Ireland CSR Award. I won't go through the whole list of them, but the biggest, I suppose, achievement for us was to become certified as carbon neutral last year. Some examples of water: we harvest rainwater for use in the polytunnel and for cleaning. We've got hippo bags in toilet cisterns. For those of you that don't know what that means, it's a bag that goes into the cistern. It takes up some space so that it reduces the amount of water that is required for each flush. We changed our heating system from oil to an air-to-water heating system in 2018, and that has resulted in a 68% decrease in oil. And we segregate waste in all departments, and portion control is critical, and training of the team is essential also. So there's some results. I didn't put in 2020 results because I didn't think that it was a fair reflection, because obviously all of our energy is reduced because of the number of visitors. But I think a fair reflection was 2017 to 2019. So you can see that our occupancy increased by 6%, as well as the number of visitors, non-residents who came to dine with us. However, our carbon footprint reduced by 75%. So the CO2 tons down by 75%. That was by changing our electricity to green electricity predominantly, which is a very simple change that any business can make by calling your electricity supplier. And then also we'd have energy charts in the hotel, so we'd know what time to turn on a piece of equipment at instead of just switching on everything at the same time. And that's a wonderful achievement for us. So in 2017, our carbon footprint was 465 tonne. By putting initiatives in place, we reduced it down to 114 tonne, and then we offset that carbon through the planting of trees. So examples of positive changes during the pandemic, we increased our outdoor space for dining outside. We now have outdoor dining in the garden, and we purchased 6 wood pellet stoves, which are carbon neutral for keeping out the outdoor areas a little bit warmer. I'm a board member of the Burren Eco-Tourism Network, which is a group of about 60 businesses, and sustainability is key to all of those businesses. And we won the Lonely Planet Best in Travel 2021 award. During the pandemic, during the first lockdown, some of our staff volunteered, and we prepared and cooked meals for over 1,000 people in the local community, the elderly and vulnerable, and it kept us busy while the doors were closed. And that's a picture of Debbie, our food and beverage manager, with one of the people that we delivered the food to, and it was all complimentary. We didn't charge anything for it, and we have a 5-year plan to continue to plant 10 trees per wedding. We have one holiday home that runs on oil at the moment, and we'll be changing that to biomass this year. We've got PV solar plans so that they will generate 45,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. We'll continue to purchase green electricity. We won't be printing any programs for our festivals. This has saved 10,000 programs being printed in the last 2 years, so we send it by email so people can do a screenshot of it, and we paint it on the wall as well, the program on the wall as well. We're carrying out a feasibility study to generate wind energy, and we will be purchasing a food composter, and we've got a food beside the hotel, so we'll be continuing to develop our biodiversity, planting trees and plants and pollinators. And that's it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present to you. And now I'm going to hand you over to Alan from Adobe.
Thanks very much, Áine. You can hear me, yeah? So my name is Alan McInerney. I'm a risk consultant with Adobe. Up until January, I was a manager with PwC. I worked with PwC for the previous 6 years, so I'm sure I can also field some questions on what it's like starting a job in the pandemic and starting a job virtually, if anyone has questions there as well. But previously, when I've spoken about sustainability, it has always been in the context of how I've worked with companies to help them improve their own sustainability reporting. When I considered the audience for today, I thought it might be more useful to talk about how, as an accounting and finance graduate myself and a chartered accountant, a route that a lot in the audience may also follow, the journey of and insights from how I myself got involved working in sustainability may actually be of much more interest. So I'll try and give you some insights on that, as well as my experience and the type of projects I've worked on, as well as the view I'm now seeing on sustainability since my recent move into industry. So starting with a quick background on my own career to date, I was an accounting and finance graduate from DCU before doing a master's then in accounting in Maynooth University. I then started on the graduate program at PwC, working towards completing my chartered accountant's exams and becoming a manager eventually. I worked in PwC for 6 years before, as I mentioned, starting in Adobe now recently. And the reason I highlight this is to really get across that my background is that of very much of an accountant and not an environmental scientist or any educational background in sustainability, which people can sometimes assume when you mention you're working in sustainability. When starting off in PwC, I didn't apply or intend initially to get involved in sustainability. If anything, there probably was limited opportunities to get involved in sustainability back then in 2014 when I started with PwC. So my role in PwC primarily involved working with companies to help them manage the material risks facing their businesses, their business, and how they report those risks. And that aspect is, I suppose, is important to the story of how I got involved in sustainability. When I started in PwC, those risks were primarily operational, financial, or regulatory risks. And looking back, it's actually very interesting now, considering how the view and interest in sustainability from clients changed over those years from 2014 to now. How I summarize that is, when I started working, sustainability was something optional and nice for companies to have, to now becoming an essential part of a company's business. As you know, it's very rare to hear of a company not doing anything in sustainability now. Initially, the main avenues for me to get involved with sustainability were very much on internal projects. For example, improving recycling or electricity usage reduction and other green initiatives within PwC internally. But there was limited client opportunities or requests coming in for sustainability assistance from clients at all, really. It was probably after my first year when I started seeing a change in attitudes and demand, with opportunities to get involved from a business development and a more external perspective starting to come up. And this really, I suppose, reflected what was going on in the world and in terms of the increasing importance and focus on businesses' sustainability efforts. I suppose as David Attenborough got more and more popular, so too did the demand for our assistance. So what started out initially with tasks like completing research in the topic, helping to organise sustainability discussions for clients, and building our own internal expertise and knowledge on sustainability, gradually then evolved into working with clients on large-scale sustainability engagements. Before I finished in PwC, I'd gotten to work on sustainability projects and audits with some of Ireland's leading companies, ESB, Musgraves, and Post, just some examples of these. So it really did go full circle in my 6 years, in that it went from very little interest to a lot of demand from clients, and it being one of the main focus areas for PwC. So a question that some in the audience may be asking as students, accounting students, how does being an accountant fit into working on sustainability? I mentioned that the team I was on within PwC focused on helping companies manage risk, and this was primarily done by helping improve controls and processes, and also auditing those controls to ensure they were effectively managing risk. Sustainability, sorry, a lot of S's here. Sustainability fell under my team's remit because if you consider sustainability from a company's perspective, there is increasing risk if a company doesn't act on sustainability issues. And two examples I'll highlight for you to help you better understand this. In the government's climate action plan published in 2019, they included a number of initiatives, but two I'll focus on. A plan to increase the carbon tax from its then rate of €26 a tonne to €80 a tonne by 2030, so a substantial increase. And then another plan that all packaging should be recyclable by 2030. If you think of any company that comes to your mind now, it's likely that they may either use substantial amounts of fuel in their operations or have a lot of packaging in their product, depending on their business model or supply chain. If so, if you consider those proposals from the government, those will have a massive impact on that company's business model and ultimately their profits. So hence a significant risk to their business. And that's how sustainability fell into my line of work within PwC. I'm sure for a lot of the students in the audience in your accounting lectures with Linda and Mary Jane and Patricia, terms like frameworks, standards, accuracy, completeness, materiality, hopefully they're ringing a bell for you, have come up regularly. And while you'll most likely have heard these terms related to financial accounting, these are terms that apply to sustainability reporting just as much so. Companies are reporting more and more non-financial metrics and information. If you've looked at a company's annual report lately, you'll have noticed they're becoming bigger and bigger documents, and there's more pages now on non-financial information than financial. So as companies provide more information, the accuracy of that information and the actual importance, materiality of it to the business has come more and more to the fore. And this is where accountants have a big role to play. So one aspect driving this is the prevalence of greenwashing, which is a term plenty of you may have heard of. And for those who haven't, greenwashing is putting out disinformation that makes an organization or individual look more environmentally responsible. And on a side note, I only came across it on another sustainability panel recently. The term greenwashing actually, the actual origin of the term, it was first coined in the 1980s and was in relation to hotel room bathroom signs. I'm sure everyone has seen. And those signs asking you to leave your towel hanging to avoid the hotel washing it to help save water and electricity for environmental reasons. And so while guests were thinking, isn't this great for the environment, it was more than likely just to save the hotel money on the washing. But after listening to Áine there, it's safe to say that 100% doesn't apply to Hotel Doolin. And I'm sure that has very much changed now. That was back in the 1980s. So that is a big driver for the demand. How do we counter the likes of greenwashing? Another large driver for the need for accountants to verify the accuracy of sustainability information is regulatory requirements, and they're more and more coming into force every year. So one example of this, some people may have heard of it, is the EU non-financial reporting requirements, which came into force in 2017, and they require Irish PLCs to report the policies, risks and metrics applicable to their business model under 4 areas: environmental, social, anti-corruption and anti-bribery. And I know Susan mentioned it, and I'll flag it again here for anyone that thinks when you're hearing sustainability mentioned that we're very much talking about climate and the environment. It's much wider than that. When you're in sustainability reporting, you get to look at the social impacts the company is having in the world and society, the overall governance of a company. So you really do get a wide view of a business when looking at it through the lens of sustainability. And personally, that's something I really enjoy within the sustainability work I've done with clients. So for companies and its stakeholders to be confident that the information that they are communicating and reporting with regards to their sustainability efforts is accurate, done in a complete manner, meeting regulatory requirements and best practice, all terms that you could equally flip and use in a financial reporting sense. That's very much where myself and the team I was working with in PwC as qualified accountants came in to assist companies. So I mentioned some of the wide range of clients I've worked with, and just to give a flavour of some of the actual aspects of the sustainability projects and what they entailed, I'll talk through some of them in a small bit more detail. So some engagements are very much consultancy type projects, for example, helping companies get off the ground with their sustainability. Examples of these would include helping companies benchmark their sustainability to best practice and against competitors. So very much showing them this is how others are doing it, and this is what you need to do to get to that level. Other examples would include assisting companies meet these new sustainability reporting and regulatory requirements, like the non-financial reporting directive I mentioned earlier. Then on the actual audit and reporting side, examples would very much include helping companies draft their sustainability report, and these are documents that are easily viewable on most public companies' websites, and even some private companies now are starting to publish them. So how a project like this we'd actually approach it would very much involve first working with the company to look at their business model and their strategy, identifying what aspects of sustainability were key and central to their business model. And that's, I suppose, a very important aspect, that sustainability should be unique to your business model, and you shouldn't be looking at other industries and companies and saying, oh, they're doing that applies to us too. So once we've helped a company decide on what aspects of sustainability they should focus on, the next step was to consider the method of measuring and reporting that sustainability story, and that would usually be done by using a framework. So Susan mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, or UN SDGs, and that's an example of a framework. So there are 17 in total of those, and the approach that I was involved with a lot of times would be mapping the company's business model to the material goals among those 17. So not all 17, but picking the handful that were material to that company, and then basing the company's sustainability efforts to working towards achieving those goals would be the kind of output within that report and the actual deliverables. So for companies that were then very mature in their sustainability journey, we'd be in a position to audit their sustainability reports, which is very much like a financial audit, and this is something I'm sure Brian might touch on as well. But Just if you consider a financial audit, it involves obtaining evidence, testing that evidence, and ensuring that what the company is actually reporting in that sustainability report is accurate. So finally, wrapping up my pit stop tour through my sustainability experience, I recently, as I mentioned, finished up with PwC, started a new role with Adobe, and I suppose this is really giving me a view from the other side of the table, sustainability from the industry perspective as opposed to practice. So from an accounting firm's perspective. What I've seen in my initial few months has confirmed that the importance of sustainability is only going to continue to grow. And as I mentioned earlier, continue the change from a nice to have to this is essential for our business. Examples of this, which become more common, is the use of sustainability as a key factor for business decisions, and I'm seeing that already with Adobe. So currently, for example, red flags for businesses on whether they will engage with another business, be it as a supplier or a customer, can include ethical, financial, and now recently data privacy considerations. Sustainability will soon be a permanent fixture on this list. So if a business is not meeting the expectations from a sustainability perspective, companies will not engage with those other companies. The great news for students in the audience is that the number of roles and opportunities to work in sustainability from a business or accounting perspective are growing continuously. And I've seen this already with my old team in PwC, with more and more focus on sustainability roles. I hope all of you, and particularly those who do have an interest in working in sustainability in the coming years, have enjoyed that and maybe taken a few lessons from it. And as Susan mentioned, feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions on how you can get involved in sustainability from an accounting or business perspective. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll pass you over to Brian now.
Thank you, Alan. You can hear me okay? Good. There's a little bit of an echo, but actually that's gone there now. That was really fascinating. Actually, I really enjoyed the three presentations. It's really interesting that we've three presenters coming from very, very different perspectives, all aligning on so many different topics. So a little bit about my own background, I suppose, how I ended up in sustainability. My dirty secret is I'm a Trinity graduate. I did economics. I worked in supply chain for 20 years of my life, in blissful ignorance as to what I was doing to the environment and the world around me. We printed books and manuals, and we shipped out CDs and discs all over the world, and nobody ever asked us where were they all going to end up. So that's my guilty secret, I suppose. But interesting that Alan mentioned about, I guess, the value in how companies are now starting to assess their supply chains. My own first brush with sustainability was we were asked in a tender. We were printing the Scottish census, believe it or not, and the Scots were quite a bit ahead of us on this. This is about 18 years ago, and they asked the company that I was running at the time about our sustainability initiatives. And we didn't even know what sustainability was back then. And they were they gave us a couple of years to figure it out, but in the printing industry, that was a particularly challenging issue. So I spent 2 years trying to figure out papers, inks, processes, people, health and safety, all of those things as to what it meant. And actually the ESB have a really clever question they ask in their tenders about sustainability, which is to describe how your sustainability credentials can help us achieve our sustainability goals. So a bit like that in the tender, I had to figure out what their sustainability objectives were, what our capabilities were, and I had to try and match them. And at that stage, that sort of awakened my interest in the process, and I said, this is really interesting. This is what's it's going to be. This is the future. Companies are going to try and measure, and it's going to become a competitive issue. So I was absolutely right, but it took the rest of the world 12 years to figure that out. Because for the first 10 years of Clearstream Solutions, I was wandering around the business world trying to convince people that this was a competitive issue, that they needed to address this because they were going to lose business and all the rest. And by and large, up until about 2 or 3 years ago, this sat, particularly in Ireland, this sat in a sort of a sustainable, kind of a marketing CSR spot. In fact, the CEO of one large Irish publicly quoted company, who shall remain unnamed, told me about 10 years ago that this climate change thing was the gobbledygook peddled by the climate change loonies. So you can imagine I was absolutely thrilled last year when I saw the same gentleman waving his company corporate sustainability report around in the air. So we're in a very different space now. And as all of the speakers have said, this is a real driver of value in their organizations. And whether it's it's a competitive issue now for companies. So a lot of our clients now are saying to us, well, how are we going to, how are we going to drive value in our business in terms of sustainability? So I'm just going to try and give you a little perspective as to what I see. I'm going to focus on some of the reporting requirements of what we're seeing and where Clearstream as an organization are helping companies to do that. But just that was kind of by way of a perspective on where we've come from in our journey. Unfortunately, now I don't have to explain to people anymore what sustainability is from a corporate perspective. Most of them get it. Just in terms of the terminology as well, just to mention that. Oh, can you see my slides? Yeah. So basically, I'm calling it ESG because that's environmental social governance. That's what the investors call it. But essentially, we're also talking about sustainability. Americans sometimes call it citizenship, corporate responsibility, sustainability. They're all essentially a tribe. The phrase that we like is responsible business, because essentially that's what it is now. Just briefly, our business, we consider ourselves Ireland's leading independent. So unlike the large accounting firms, we're independent carbon sustainability. And again, what we do is we help clients to measure and manage their carbon and sustainable practices. So going from the nice, fluffy marketing stuff to very specific real metrics. It's tangible and it's very measurable, and everybody wants to see the KPIs now. We also provide tools to help companies to do that, and we've run a bunch of awards and stuff like that. I should mention that I'm not showing this to show off in terms of the clients, but it's just the wide range of different organizations that are now engaging on sustainability as a topic. And we started off dealing with a very corporate audience, as I guess, as many of the others did, but now it's really becoming the preserve of SMEs and all businesses, from the large corporates right down. So just to give you a perspective on what we're seeing at the moment as being the big trends around sustainability, and because we're consultants, we had to come up with our own mega trends. So here are the Clearstream 12 mega trends. First thing we see is that companies' performance is no longer just being measured on financial, right? So we're seeing this balance of value creation on societal impacts. And we had the billionaire group in America some years back who redefined the purpose of an organization away from just shareholder financial impact towards overall value to society. And this is a big trend, and we're seeing organizations try to measure this. The big organizations try to measure and understand the value that they're having on a much wider societal. So the products, both in terms of positive and negative impacts. ESG performance is driving investment markets. So this is very interesting, not just for the PLCs or the quoted listed companies, but for all the investment organizations and the banks and anyone involved in the financial markets. But essentially, money has figured out that companies that are performing well from a sustainability perspective are the ones that provide the best value for money from an investment perspective, lower risk as well, as Jonathan has mentioned. So what we're seeing is the investors get really key on looking at companies' ESG performance, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that after. Again, previously mentioned, but the EU is just about to publish. So next month, in April, they're going to publish the next draft of the non-financial disclosure and reporting requirements, which you're going to have a wider range of companies being asked to disclose and report their non-financial metrics. So regulation, typically, if we're waiting for regulation to drive change, then we've lost the competitive advantage. So any of you who are here who are interested in really driving change, in my experience, regulation is what hoovers up the laggards. We need to be ahead of this and looking at the future as to what's actually and anticipating it, getting ahead. Circular economy, huge issue, and a couple of the reasons is obviously a lot of people look at this as a waste issue, but on the other end of the circular economy, we will not hit our carbon or climate change targets unless we make better use of the materials and products that we have in circulation. So just to put it in perspective, about 50% of our total global emissions are locked into products. They're in materials and products. And if we continue to consume those materials and products at the same rate we're doing, we'll never get to net zero. So we have to find ways to reuse, upgrade, extend the life of products. So the circular economy presents a whole bunch of interesting innovations in that. So when you hear people talking about circular economy, very often it's waste and recycling. A lot of interesting opportunities in the circular economy. And there's a whole bunch of services that need to be in there to support those as well. The conscious consumer, so again, empowerment, activism, Greta, Extinction Revolution, Friday strikes, and I'm sure you're all the active students in terms of spending your money. The most sustainable thing you could do, incidentally, is to spend your money in Doolin or wherever you see a company delivering sustainable performance. But what we're seeing is consumers increasingly, and all the evidence is showing, I'm seeing metrics yesterday from Kerry Group saying that 57% of consumers now want to see sustainability messaging on the product. So we're becoming activists. The consumer is becoming an activist and is driving this performance. Responsible business. So again, when we started this journey 10, 15 years ago, the person responsible for sustainability had an office, they had a door, they might have had a team, might have been a green team. They were responsible for sustainability. That's gone now. It has to be embedded across the business. So it's now something that's felt and owned by everyone in the business. And you can sense the companies that are good at this because it's embedded in the culture. It's the way they do business. It's not, yes, we have a sustainability department or CEO, whatever it is. Employees are driving the issues. Again, the Doolin case study was phenomenal because what it shows is that, if this wasn't authentic, then the employees would be the first ones to go, that's BS. The company's out there saying one thing and they're not living it internally. So employees are key drivers of business. We've seen some of the big multinationals suffer a little bit from this, where they're out telling us about how great they are in a whole variety of different ways, but the employees are starting to get active and call them out on some of this. Diversity and inclusion, again, intuitively probably understand this, but actually how it drives value in the business is a relatively new driver in this part of the world. So in the States, for instance, it's mandatory in certain areas to have certain part of your spend go to women and minority-owned businesses. We can see the potential that would drive here, but also as we have an increased diversity in our workforce, the opportunity that presents organizations across a whole range of different issues. So again, as an increasingly important topic, companies are going to have to report on this going forward. Again, mainstream media catching up with social media, and we mentioned David Attenborough, but you see it now, even our own George Lee every second day is on talking about something related to climate and sustainability, which certainly was not the case 3 years ago, and they're catching up with social media, and BBC and Sky and all these channels, fantastic in terms of the work they're doing. Technology. So technology is playing a big part in terms of our ability to track, manage, report, assess, and particularly in terms of things like the circular economy. We have the use of these products to help us to manage returns, understand where the product is, how it's being used, etc. Last couple, ambition and targets. So you'll hear a lot about carbon neutrality, and then I would say next stage is net zero, because we're incorporating our supply chain emissions, or even better, science-based targets. So there's a lot of focus on setting targets that are ambition-based over a longer period. Now, Ireland as a country has set a 2050 net zero target. What does that mean for organizations? So a lot of people are trying to figure out what that means to their particular business. And finally, as I said earlier, climate and sustainability is now a competitive issue. So when I talked to the CEOs or the CFOs of 10 years ago, it was all about cost reduction. It was all about, taking out carbon, less energy, less water, less waste, that was going to drive the benefit of the sustainability. Now, the benefit is we're going to grow our business. We're going to attract new employees. We're going to be much more interesting from a relationship perspective for our suppliers. We're going to be much more attractive to investors. It's a competitive issue. It's gone away. So CFOs now realize the ROI on sustainability. And in fact, if I was thinking of a title, that's probably what I would have started with. The ROI for sustainability has never been stronger. Very quickly, and I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but I just want to talk to you. Just if you look at the ESG perspective from an investor, so what the investor wants to see is a resilience in the market, right? So investors are driving more engagement and basically transparency in markets, so they can understand how risky companies are. I mentioned the EU regulations, and we're about to see the new disclosures regulation. As we mentioned greenwashing, so SDFR is often called the greenwashing regulation, and it's to help investors to spot where companies are being fluffy and are greenwashing in terms of their claims. New standards, so the TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, is probably a piece of legislation or guidance, should I say guidance, it's not legislation necessarily, that has had the biggest impact, because essentially what it does is it helps financial organizations to put financial measures on climate risk. And to understand in a business, and I'm sure you're living this every day at the moment in your new role, Jonathan, but we're seeing this ability to be able to understand the impact, both mitigation and adoption of climate will have on a business from a financial perspective. Zero targets I mentioned, and there's a whole bunch of ESG investor initiatives like PRI looking into defining what it means from an investor, what sustainability means from an investor perspective. On the flip side, if we look at the corporate side, we have a number of initiatives where companies are trying to align the frameworks for reporting and managing sustainability. So the big four accounting firms got together and developed a set of core ESG metrics, which they have recommended are used along with the International Business Council and the World Economic Forum to help companies align their sustainability initiatives. We mentioned the EU reporting regulation. So we have standards, we have different types of companies, we require assurance, we have an enforcement. So we're starting to see some real rigor behind non-financial reporting. A number of schemes. So for instance, here in Ireland, we're involved in CDP. CDP is the world's largest framework network for reporting and disclosing climate change. About 10,000 companies worldwide report to CDP. It was once described to me as a bit of a rank and spank scheme, in that, you know, companies get rated, and obviously the rating is to drive better performance, but it's amazing what a rating will do to drive competitiveness and to get companies actually wanting to compete. You could see Microsoft competing with Amazon, competing with Google in the sustainability space. But that's what these ESG reporting and rating frameworks do. And I'll give you a little bit more insight into that in a minute. The accountants have mobilized, and you're seeing it. I mean, you're probably very familiar and more familiar than I am with some of these organizations, but they're all aligning in terms of getting together to define, particularly IFRS, and a number of these other sustainability organizations, to define what sustainability reporting looks like. And the term integrated reporting, which was traditionally seen as being, you know, we put a bit of sustainability in along with our financial reporting, but true integrated reporting is understanding that financial impacts that our sustainability initiatives or impacts are going to have. So it's measuring and having a fully integrated view of the financial impact that will have on our sustainability outputs, and also the impact that our sustainability impacts are going to have on our financial impact, and also the ability to provide practical feedback to the investors. So last couple of slides, these were mentioned. We do this to try and demystify and declutter the alphabet soup that was mentioned. Susan mentioned earlier on. We have the principles and protocols, so the Sustainable Development Goals. These essentially are frameworks that organizations can use to define and outline their sustainability credentials. And the Sustainable Development Goals are probably the most widely used and well recognized, including along with the Global Compact. There are reporting standards then that organizations have. So on one end, you've GRI, on the other hand, SASB and IR, who have just actually merged together into value reporting. And essentially what they provide is guidance to companies on how to disclose and report. The next one down then are a series of benchmarks and certifications. And again, rating, some of these carry a rating, like EcoVadis, SEDEX or CDP, and some of them are providing a certification or a stamp of performance as a benchmark or certification. And even if you're not doing any of that yourself, or you're not reaching out, there are organizations out there who are assessing your sustainability performance. Increasingly, so the world's largest of those, MSCI, it's a very sophisticated organization, and what they do is they go out and they measure companies' performance from a sustainability perspective. So invariably, even if you're not disclosing or you're not sharing, they're out there measuring you. So how that looks like in terms of let's say a profiling of those organizations, if we go from broad to focused, CDP, for instance, is very focused on climate change metrics. GRI, on the other end, the company defines based on its materiality what it considers important. On the other axis, we go from investor focused to broad range focused, and you have things like TCFD is very focused on investors and financial, whereas something like UN Global Compact has a much broader appeal to organizations. So hopefully that helps to declutter some of those a little bit, but they all do map, and there is a way to view them all separately. So finally, I'm just going to skip through this. Essentially, so companies that are looking to address sustainability need to think of these. They need to think about which are the principles and protocols that are relevant to me. What are the reporting standards that I'm going to need to report to? So is it GRI or SASB? What certifications and standards am I going to be looking to be rated against? And finally, if I am rated, what Sustainalytics or what programs and ratings or indices am I going to participate in? My final slide is just a suggestion about what we see as the key elements of good ESG reporting, and a number of you have touched on this. But the first thing is clear governance, management, commitment aligned with the values. So as an organization, there is no point in us talking about how wonderful we are from a sustainability perspective if our organization's governance and management are saying something completely different. So it's pretty basic, but governance and alignment. Governance is really critical. It comes up in all of the areas around ESG reporting. So governance in terms of the correct resources, etc. Complete and materiality assessments are very important. They inform us as to what the key issues are. So I would consider materiality assessments a very important part of any ESG reporting framework. Asking your audience, and that feeds into the materiality, so that's also part of that materiality, it's stakeholder engagement. Robust data collection and verification, and obviously in terms of all the accountancy firms, and we do carbon accounting for clients, and we help them with the data collection and verification of that. Using a recognised framework such as TCFD, SDGs, etc. Evidence of policy and performance. The most important thing, and the best ESG reports to me talk about the challenges as much as they do the performance. If you want to see a real world beater, the Cisco sustainability report is phenomenal. You'll be amazed at the amount of detail they go into the challenges and where they're facing issues, but be authentic and transparent about those. And also KPIs. They have to be. ESG reporting is very often very fluffy from a KPI perspective. We need to see more KPIs and measures. And finally, be brave, have a big ambition and a vision for the future. So thank you. I know I've rabbited on there for a good 15 or 20 minutes. I probably got a little over time, but hopefully there was something in there for everyone. And I think we're going to take some questions now.
Great, guys. Listen, thanks for 4 great presentations. We do have quite a number of questions, so I think just in terms of process, we might start with Susan, as you were the first presenter, Susan. So a few questions here from participants. First one, do you foresee sustainability being part of the professional qualifications for accountants?
Yes, I think that's the direction of travel. Can you hear me? Because I'm told unmute my mic. Okay. I've got a message saying unmute your mic. Oh, just
no, we can hear you fine.
Good. Thank you. Yes, in answer to the question, I think that definitely is going to be the direction of travel. There's a lot of competing demands on what is included in the syllabus in Chartered Accountants Ireland because there's so much to cover. But the fact that it was included certainly is a core element in the final accounting exams, final admittance exams rather, certainly speaks to the fact that this will be there'll be increasing focus on this. One thing that's relevant, though, I think, is whether or not sustainability should be similar to the argument always with ethics. Whether or not something like sustainability should be in its own discrete area or should it be integrated into the rest of the curriculum, and that's something I think the curriculum organisers will look at and address. Certainly it's becoming part of our continuing professional development programme for sure, and more details of that are certainly available on the website. I think it's also becoming part of undergrad and postgrad accounting and finance programmes, as possibly in this one as well. So definitely yes, in answer to that question.
And great, actually, just an extension of that question was really around the undergrad accounting and finance programs as to whether it will become a criteria for accreditation or exemptions for entry into the professional qualifications. So
that certainly I can't answer, and that is something for my colleagues in the education department to answer. I don't know of any developments in that respect yet, but I'll certainly feed this back to my colleagues in that department and see if I can get an answer and pass it on.
And last question was around the term carbon accounting, and we've heard it used a number of times today in different contexts. I suspect a lot of people are probably having difficulty on conceptualizing what that means. Is there a sort of an easy explanation as to what that means for let's say aspiring accountants in terms of their use of reporting financial data? Do they now have to report carbon data as well?
It depends on how they're reporting, and this is something I may have to hand over to both Alan and to Brian when they're talking about it. The way we're doing it in the Institute as part of our own environmental plan for 2021 is we're measuring how much carbon our activities are emitting, and we're actually using a consultant, John Barcroft, in the Environmental Edge to look at that along with an internal energy auditor. So the way we're going to do that is to use specialised software to monitor how many tons of carbon we're emitting, quantify those, measure those, and look at reducing those. However, both Brian and Alan may also be able to contribute to that, and certainly Alan in terms of carbon accounting. Could I pass that question to you, Alan?
Sure, Susan, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, perfect. So as you mentioned, there are a number of different softwares and tools that companies are using, and it very much comes back to the maturity levels and stages that a company is at. I've come across companies at all, I suppose, points on the spectrum with terms of not knowing the definition or the term or what it actually means, to those who are very experienced and have a very strong internal process and control framework down to ensure the accuracy and are actually comfortable with a third party like PwC coming in and verifying that this is the correct carbon emissions for that company. So it does. So from what I've seen, it's very much, where is the company at? Are they at the point where they're trying to just getting to the point where they can collect that data on their carbon and how they're going to go about doing that, right up to companies who are so confident that they're able to publish it publicly and get a third party like PwC to actually come in and audit that data. And similar to what I mentioned, the principles behind a sustainability audit are very much similar to a financial audit. You're looking at the source of data. Can you show evidence to back up the carbon data that you're showing us as a third party? And we'll go in and test the accuracy and the completeness of that. So hopefully that answers your question.
I did. I don't know if you're familiar with the Nick Anderson's article, I think it was 2019, where he talked about using FRS to, or the IFRS, the existing standards, to measure carbon and sustainability metrics generally. And I thought that was very interesting. It kind of not so much negated the need for separate sustainability reporting standards, but certainly said that it kind of made the point that accountants have all the tools that they need already to do this without necessarily reinventing the wheel. But Brian, I think from terms of carbon, this might be something you could also answer.
Yeah, so the most common frameworks for measuring and reporting carbon are the greenhouse gas protocol, GHG protocol, which is pretty much most companies use that. And then there's another standard, an ISO standard 14064, and there's also a verification standard attached to that. I would say the good thing about those standards is that they're universal. So pretty much everywhere around the world, everyone uses the same standard for greenhouse gas accounting. However, I would say that they're quite different from financial accounting in that the types of rigor, there's a lot more extrapolation, and the data is very often buried in very strange places, particularly when we look at indirect emissions and scope 3 emissions. So it requires a slightly different approach in terms of analysis and extrapolations and averaging and those type of things. So very often accountants are a little uncomfortable with some of that because it's not the black and white that they've been traditionally used to. However, what I would say is particularly in scope 3, we're seeing an increasingly amount of financial analysis being brought through to company purchases. So effectively, as you said, taking your financial statements and your purchasing ledger and turning that into a carbon footprint. Because that's how a lot of organizations assess their scope 3 emissions. So we're seeing a convergence, but we're still at the moment there is a separation between the two different standards. So hopefully that perspective helps.
Thanks for that, guys. I'm going to move on to Áine now because there's a few questions there that have come up. First one, Áine, is from Alan Collins and Erlingus, and he's asked about the capital investment required to become carbon neutral. And by extension, there's an additional question there around, can you actually measure the return on investment from that particular capital expenditure?
Thanks very much for the question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
So the capital investment, yes, there has been an investment, but it has certainly paid off. To be honest, we look at each project as it individually. So for example, our air to water heating system, we actually arranged with the company a lease agreement for 15 years, but we have the option to be able to buy that after however many of years. So we put it in 3 years ago. We still haven't bought it, but so we look at each project on a case-by-case basis. I would say that probably the biggest investment has been time. You know, you're trying to run a hotel that we're busy. We'd have, you know, 90% occupancy most of the year, about 7 million turnover. Okay, it's not big in the grand scheme of some businesses, but it's big for Doolin. So, but the return on investment has been significant. So, for example, we would have, we reckon about 50% more weddings because of the sustainability side of things. So more and more people want to get married at a venue that is carbon neutral. So we don't do any advertising like you know, mainstream advertising. It's all word of mouth. So we've increased over the last 8 years from 20 weddings to 130 this year. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's fascinating to see that the actual additional demand there purely on the basis that you are sustainable. A second question there from Fiona Malone in the School of Business in Blanchardstown campus around, are there parts of the business that you're yet to, let's say, become fully carbon neutral with? Yep.
So there's more and more projects that we have on the cards. So on my last slide, we have a 5-year plan. So like to become carbon neutral, I mentioned already, it's not just about planting trees. You have to show that you're reducing your energy, water and waste. So there's certainly more and more things that we could be doing. Like I'd love to have a windmill near the hotel. The PV solar panels are in our plan for the next year that we'll have those implemented. So I had given that statistic of 465 tonne of carbon in 2017 down to 114 tonne and offsetting that 114 tonne. My aim in the next 3 to 5 years would be that 114 tonne, that we wouldn't be generating that. I hope that answers the question.
No, it does. I think that's made it quite clear, and actually interesting. I noticed when you presented the stats around oil and LPG gas consumption, they were coming down, but I would imagine there's still emissions from those particular fossil fuels that you currently have to offset. Is that right? Yes.
So, for example, we use flow gas as our gas supplier. We haven't changed to bio LPG yet, and we should be using it, but there's a contract in place. They have been very helpful with different events that we have organised. So, like for a business like us, or a small business like us, we have to kind of weigh up the profitability side of it as well. But of course, our gas, the aim would be that there'd be no emissions from that, you know, in maybe 2 years' time. So yeah, we've been on a journey so far, but we have a lot more to do as well, and we are ambitious. Yeah.
And the last question here from Pascalina in our Tala campus relates to access to funding. Were there supports in place to allow you to make the investments viable?
To be perfectly honest with you, we've had no government funding whatsoever. We haven't got anything. We do know that for changing the heating system from oil to air to water, the company who put that in did benefit from the Better Energy Community Grant, but we haven't. This has all been kind of off our own back. Yeah. Which is not right, I don't think. You know, I think that there should be supports there for that.
Thank you, Áine. I'm going to jump over now to Alan, if that's okay. And Alan, the first question there is from Sandra Thompson and relates to the challenges that people might face in getting involved in sustainability, I guess, from a career perspective.
Sure, Cormac. So yeah, definitely. I know when I started my career in PwC that the biggest challenge was maybe like actual opportunities, and I suppose that was probably driven from demand. So from a practice perspective, if anyone was getting into an accounting firm now, the benefit is that challenge is definitely diminishing. In my last year or two in PwC, the majority of asks from clients, so many were sustainability related queries on what can we do, how can you help us in this area, and that's only going to increase. I know from talking to colleagues in PwC, the focus on the financial audit is now going to start incorporating as well more and more on sustainability too. So the example I was given was that 10 years ago, the IT element of an audit was very much a kind of niche piece off to the corner of an audit. And now the IT element is, I suppose, close to 40–50% of an audit in terms of making sure that the systems are actually feeding accurate financial data. And that was the example I was given, that sustainability is moving into the audit space to become a key part of the audit. So that's only going to increase the opportunities for people in practice to get involved in sustainability, and obviously a big part there is putting your hand up. You mightn't initially see roles advertised as sustainability specific roles, but there's more and more opportunities. So it's a case of saying I'm also interested in getting involved in that. From an industry perspective, both with some of the clients I worked at while in PwC and now from an Adobe perspective, I definitely am seeing more and more sustainability opportunities in terms of kind of project management type roles. So you're very much leading sustainability projects, sustainability improvement projects within that company. And I know some of the companies I mentioned earlier, I was seeing more and more grads joining them in sustainability specific roles. So I know the question was very much around the challenges, but I think those challenges are actually definitely reducing, and there's a lot of opportunity there for someone who is interested in sustainability as a standalone career path or combining it with a business and accounting profession too.
Great. Second question then actually relates to, I suppose it's more of a technical question. When we look at, let's say, financial projections, we've this traditional method of using discounted cash flows for looking into the future. And I'm wondering to what extent that is still appropriate when it comes to risk measurement with things like climate change, which might be some way off in the future and might be heavily discounted in a traditional model. Are there newer models coming into place to look at that sort of high impact potentially in the future?
Yes, so I suppose two aspects to this. There's a big field there around, I suppose, scenario planning on, okay, if the global temperature was to drop by 3%, and how would that have an impact on your business? And from my experience and what I've seen, I suppose at the moment it's companies who are very advanced and mature in their sustainability efforts are now fully grasping the urgency of the climate crisis and saying this is going to have material impacts on our business. And you can see that already from storms. Some would say pandemics are caused by ecological and environmental issues too. So some very mature companies in their sustainability journey are looking at that, looking down the line, and future planning based on climate scenarios. Kind of on a side to that, then companies that I worked with that maybe weren't as mature and advanced in that area, what they're looking and trying to improve on is very much the metrics and looking at their KPIs. And I know Brian mentioned the importance of that. So for a number of projects, it was very much a case of nailing down those metrics. And by having good metrics and KPIs, it allows you to benchmark versus competitors, and also actually look at prior years and judge your performance and measure your trends and how you are improving. So that gives you a forward-looking view. If your goal is to reduce emissions by a certain percent by 2030, if you can compare your 2018 to your 2019 to your 2020, you can very quickly see how are we looking in the future. Do we need to make drastic changes to our current sustainability initiatives? So I suppose those two viewpoints are those from very advanced companies in sustainability, and then maybe the majority of what I've seen where they're maybe more looking at the 5-year future time plan as opposed to maybe 10, 15.
Fantastic. And a third question there, Alan, comes again from Fiona, and it's relates to our own, let's say, degree programs. What areas do you feel should be addressed in teaching sustainability in our degrees?
So I know, and I think from speaking to some in college now, that it is getting much more attention as part of accounting and finance degrees, and in the coming year or so, there will be elements of sustainability. And it's quite a broad area, and I think it's only when people get into it that they realise the broadness to it. One avenue is very much sustainable finance, and Brian had a really good slide looking at the corporate perspective and also the investor perspective. So in some aspects of my work, it was very much looking at the investor perspective, and we actually had a separate team in PwC who were looking at that. And I suppose from the investor perspective, it's much more from the asset management angle, and again there's a whole other set of KPIs and data points that they're interested in versus maybe the more stakeholder facing in the sustainability report. I know from when I spoke to, I suppose, different people in different stockbrokers, trying to get a feel for on the sustainability finance side. They mentioned that there are just, I suppose, and this is going back to Brian's point on the fluffiness, sometimes they did say that it's really gaining ground identifying a number of key sustainability metrics that are really driving the revenue side of the business. So one example I can give is speaking to a stockbroker who was considering CRH, and he said, I was asking him, is he interested in the non-financial information at the front of the report? And he said, I'll be honest, I flicked to 2 or 3 key metrics, and one of those is CRH's efficiency in recycling cement. And he said that's sustainability metric, which a lot of people would think that's great for the environment. But he said, from my perspective, that's actually a key profit driver, how efficient they are at recycling cement. So I suppose it was a different perspective, and something I previously wouldn't have considered or known. So there's a lot there to consider from the sustainability finance, sustainability in a general sense. So bringing that into the curriculum, there's a lot to consider on what's I suppose is appropriate and applicable to accounting and finance.
Thanks, Alan. And last but not least, Brian, you're up with a few questions. So first question relates to something that you mentioned around the ESB looking at its suppliers or potential suppliers in their tenders. Does the supply chain become an integral part of how companies are measuring their carbon footprint?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at the actual, as I say, the totality of the globe, but for the most companies, it's the same. So we look at our operational emissions, our scope 1 and scope 2, our energy and our fuels. For most of us, that's the smallest part of our emissions. Anywhere, depending on the industry, it could be anywhere as low as in the retail sector, for instance, it's probably only 5% of our emissions. The rest of it's in our supply chains. It's what we buy and sell. So for most organizations, for them to hit their targets, their net zero targets or science-based targets, they have to address supply chain. And that's, as I said, where the circular economy comes in. That's where for our purchasing comes in. So I loved Aine's stories about how she's engaging with their suppliers, because that's where the conversation needs to happen. And we need to select suppliers that are delivering. And even if we don't say that, because people say, oh, green is more expensive. It's not. If you lay it out over a 3, 4, 5 year period, that this is where we're going. And if you want to deal with us, you're going to have to show your credentials, show us more green and lower carbon solutions. So really critical piece, and finance has a big role to play. You just mentioned very briefly something that Alan mentioned earlier, which is really important. Like traditionally, carbon footprinting and financial accounting tend to be historic. We're all now focusing on how we hit our targets. So people are using things like carbon pricing, carbon budgeting as tools to measure the impact that investments, and we really need finance people to help us with that, because the carbon people might understand decarbonisation pathways, but it's the finance people who understand the investment triggers. So putting a price on carbon into the future, really critical and an important tool in terms of measuring.
Second question actually relates to some of the many acronyms I've heard in the conversation, like NFDR and TFCD and taxonomy and so on. And the question relates to the role of policy and regulation in driving this agenda. Is it just a matter of time before all this stuff is completely mandatory, or is there still a grey area there where people can opt out?
So look, I think for large companies, it's going to be mandatory. And as I said earlier, I think if they want to wait for it to become mandatory, fine, but you lose the ability to drive value. And for me, this is a competitive issue. So if companies want to be better and more, I guess, value and drive value in their business, then they should be ahead of legislation. So, but yes, you can wait, but I think it will be mandated. There are two schools of thought. People think we should have alignment on all of these things, but there is another school of thought that says, well, actually, it's the lack of alignment that leads to the creativity and leads companies to go a little bit further. So if I'll take Microsoft, for instance, out of the pack, they suddenly came up with climate positive. Right, so you know, where was that? So they said we're actually going to be negative in our emissions, so we're going to go past net zero. That wouldn't happen if we had all this sort of alignment. Everybody needs to be the same. So I think there's a balance here between how everyone looks at ESG through the same lens, But how do we actually look and say, well, what's the next? So there's an element of innovation and creativity that we want to see, albeit creativity is a dangerous word from a financial management perspective. But when it comes to being ambitious about where we want to go on carbon, I think I'd like to see both a balance. Yes, we want to see more alignment, but we don't want to crush everything by making it legal and mandatory. So hopefully that.
And last question for you, Brian, relates to a very important part of the presentation that you brought up, which is carbon management. And we're beginning to see that term being used more and more in a wide variety of disciplines. And I'm wondering, would you foresee in an education context a role for let's say a carbon management education provision that's perhaps multidisciplinary and takes into account, let's say, engineers and environmentalists and accountants and so on? Is there something emerging there as a professional field?
Yeah, there is, and it's a gap, frankly. We're doing carbon training at the moment for the Dublin Chamber of Commerce, and the thing has been way oversubscribed, and we have a waiting list. If I went back 5-6 years ago, there was no interest. There might have been 3 or 4 people in the country who might be interested. So it's a rapidly changing. So I would say yes to the educators, get on it. There is a need. Some of the courses cover it at a very basic level, but the sort of sophistication we're seeing in requirements, whether what Alan mentioned around data and validation and aligning our purchasing spend and investment to carbon and understanding life cycle assessment is another area in carbon where there's a lot of science work, but it's not being taken out of the science and into the practical application. So yeah, there's a huge fertile area there. And if you consider how critical climate change is going to be to all of us, I'm surprised that there aren't carbon courses already out there. But so that's, people do ask us about that. We typically we're sending them online. So maybe TUD, there you go. There's the opportunity.
Great, that's fantastic, Brian. I think you're making a justifiable sales pitch there to the university. So I just like to thank all 4 presenters for their very interesting presentations today. And I'm going to hand back to my colleague Linda now to conclude the event.
Thanks, Cormac. Yes, I agree with you, Cormac. It was fantastic presentations there from everyone. Áine, I think we'll all be heading down on our bicycles to Hotel Doolin this summer to claim our free tea and coffee. But I have to say the presentations were great, and it's amazing. We all have to change our mindsets, and we will be changing those to deal with business. And as you say, Alan, you kind of ended up in this area, but going forward, you can see from Brian and Susan's presentations there also that the reporting and the standards are requiring that students, are aware of this, and it will impact everyone, not only accountants, but all of business. So it's a really important area, and you've given a great insight to it too, and I hope everyone benefited from it here at the webinar today. So, as Brian's slide there said, the near future is now, and it's so true. So with that, I'd just like to thank the IT and marketing support that we had for this, Eamon and Addy and Mairead and Karen, and thanks to everyone who attended here today, and hope you found it enjoyable and informative. I'm sure you did, because it was absolutely excellent presentations from the 4 panelists. So with that, I'd like to just say goodbye and take care, and thank you.